Woohoo, we already have 2 viewers. Mhm. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Handy Quilter Live on YouTube and Facebook this morning. Hope you're all having a great day. It is a so we have a few more minutes. I see So Many Miles Studio. Hello from Tacoma. Good morning. Good morning. Randy in Central Florida. We have Carrie Clark in Syracuse, New York. Barb Smith from Arizona. So lots of people tuning in already. I hope you are as excited as I am. We're talking all about thread today. So I know this can be a touchy situation for some people, and there's going to be a lot of good information here to help demystify any of the issues that you might be having with some of the threads that you can use on your long arms. Now, good morning from Lori in Las Vegas. Oh, that'd be a fun place to be right now, but gosh darn, I have to be at work. Oh well. We'll just have to make this as fun as Las Vegas. So, to get started, one of the, I think, most common things that I've heard through all of my different travels teaching and customers of mine that have tried quilting their own quilts, my machine doesn't like that thread. My machine only uses this kind. My machine only does this. I hate to break it to you, but your machine does not know what thread it likes or doesn't like. You need to teach your machine what it is going to like and what it's going to love and what is going to run smoothly by making all the appropriate adjustments. So we're going to learn how to make all of those adjustments as we go along today. So again, I'm working on a Moxie XL. So this is a 18-inch throat space on this machine. It is set up on a 8-foot loft frame. So I have my my frame set to the low position. So it is essentially what we call clear view mode on the larger frame of machine. So I have a nice, amazing view of my entire quilt top right over the front bars here. And if I'm going to do anything like ruler work, I can very easily have my rulers hanging over the edge of the bar here without being interrupted. So love having my machine set into the low position. And again, on one of my large machines, I have it set into clear view because that is the best position that I like to work in. So Moxie XL, we got 2100 stitches per minute. It is a fantastic little machine. Now, when it comes to thread, there is a certain amount of, there's a number of different things that can bring issues with different threads. Biggest culprit is going to be tension. So we have to make sure that we get our tension right. Secondary, we're going to need to make sure that we're using the correct size needle. If you do not use the correct size needle for the thread, it is not going to stitch nicely. And then third, and I've sort of touched on this in the last couple of weeks, you have to sometimes slow down your machine to give it an opportunity to form proper stitches while you're trying to do your quilting. If you are trying to go full speed, whatever that might be based on your machine, you're not giving the thread and the needle and the rotary hook a chance to actually form stitches without causing breakage in your thread. So those are the three main culprits. And again, we're going to deal with how you can overcome all of those. So, good morning, Cynthia. Another fellow educator tuning in. It's always nice to see. So, we got a lot to cover, so we're going to dive in. I'm just going to, I see one thing. I want to turn on a little bit of extra light that I forgot to turn on. Make sure that we are in full brightness here. And I don't know if that window's a little loud. We can close that window. There's my beautiful studio on Granville Island. It is a lovely, vibrant place. And by vibrant, there is a lot of noise. I am actually right beside a lovely, beautiful courtyard that has different buskers that come and play. Sometimes it is a pan flute and it is beautiful and soothing. Sometimes it's piano players, there's singers with guitars. Sometimes it's bagpipes, and it can be a lot. And then right next to that courtyard is a concrete facility, a concrete plant. So there are always trucks revving and coming and going. There's a lot of beeping from trucks backing up. So I'll try and minimize that background noise. So let's talk about needles first, because I feel like you need to have a good foundation understanding needle types before you can understand how to adjust your tension properly with that. So to show off, I have my slightly oversized Handy Quilter branded needle. And again, maybe we'll switch to this camera here and I'll show you a nice close-up. So, we have this beautiful Handy Quilter branded needle. Now, there are a few different parts of the needle that we need to know about. So right here is the shank. This is the part that is going to go into the collar on your machine where the screw will hold it in place. Now, on our industrial our Handy Quilter machines, they are classified as industrial. This is a round shank. Now, on your domestic sewing machines, they will have a flat piece on the back of the shank, and that way you cannot accidentally put your needle in backwards. So on domestic machines, you have that, and it is really great to make sure it's in properly. With these machines, we need to make sure that we have the groove of the needle to the front. Now, you can make some minor adjustments by rotating it ever so slightly, but if you have a well-timed machine, you should never have to do that. So if you have been told you have to turn your needle to the 530 position to have good timing and to have good stitching, again, that's a bit of a myth. If your machine is not properly timed, having it turned ever so slightly to the 530 position might help you have good stitches, but really, truly, a well-timed machine should have your needle facing directly forward, and that's what we call 6 o'clock. And if you imagine a clock and it's rotating on it, that's where we're getting these numbers from. So we have the shank. This is going to go into the collar of the needle on the machine, and again, pull my machine right forward, and again. So you're going to undo the little screw here to put in your needle. You're going to make sure that it's lined up nice and forward. So the groove is the front of the needle. We have the eye of the needle, and that's where your thread is going to pass through. We have the point of the needle. And then we have this little cutout on the back. And again, sort of, there we go. So hopefully you can see that nice and clear against my shirt, that this is the cutout. This is the scarf. So the point of the scarf is when the needle goes down under through your quilt and into the lower portion of the machine, the rotary hook is going to pass right into that space, and it should ever so slightly, it is a micron away from touching the needle, and it will grab a loop of thread. Now, and again, this is just a little shoelace. It works for demonstration purposes. Right here, you can see that the thread, again, try and get it to focus on that, the thread is somewhat sticking out of the groove on the front. That means that this is not the appropriate size needle for this thread. This groove is to protect our thread as the needle passes down into our fabric. So here's my demo fabric. If this was our machine, the needle is going to pass down and through. And now I'm gonna try and draw your attention right here to this little loop. The fabric on the top side is pressing this little bit of thread against the needle. And as the needle comes up with the take-up lever, you can see right there, that is the loop that forms. And that is where the hook is going to catch. Again, just going to catch that and wrap that around our bobbin. And then it's going to come up The take-up lever will then finish its stroke, pull up any excess thread, your machine will move forward, and you'll be ready to take your next stitch. And again, as it comes up, it's going to form that loop, rotary hook will grab it, and another stitch is formed. So that is the basics of how your stitches are going to be formed and how the machine actually engages with that top thread by the rotary hook sliding right into that area. Now again, if you are having skipped stitches, it could be that your machine is slightly out of time, or possibly that the hook just wasn't catching that loop of bobbin thread, and that can become a tension issue. So there is sort of a series of things you need to check first, but first and foremost, check your needle. If you can't remember when the last time you changed your needle, change your needle. That also applies to rotary cutting blades. If you can't remember the last time you changed your rotary blade, change your rotary blade, do yourself a favor, treat yourself. It is absolutely worth it. But with needles, the recommendation is every new quilt deserves a fresh needle. So how big is a quilt? Well, a baby quilt can be quite small. A king-size quilt can be incredibly large. So how do you know which quilt deserves a new needle? I tend to use mine for a fair amount. So if it's a queen-size quilt, I will use one needle. If it is a baby quilt, I'll quilt 2 or 3 baby quilts before I change my needle, because I know that they're much smaller, so I'm not putting as much stitching compared to a full-size quilt or a queen-size quilt. Sometimes with a king-size quilt, I'll use 2 needles. If I start having some issues with thread halfway through the quilt, I'm just going to give it a new needle, and that is going to take care of that. And we can maybe switch back to that camera. There's a little less distortion with it. So sometimes you have to use your discretion as to when you're going to be making these changes. Now, other factors that can affect when you need a new needle. If you are doing a lot of stitching through appliques, say the applique is done with fusible webbing, where there might be 1, 2, maybe even 3 layers of fusible webbing kind of gumming up in that fabric. If you're doing a lot of stitching through that, you're going to notice that your needles are going to dull a little bit faster, and you might start getting some thread shredding issues and things like that. So again, if it's a very difficult quilt in the sense that you have lots of fusible webbing, give yourself a fresh needle. And that might be a small project that might take 2 or 3 needles to complete. If you're using batik fabrics, I find especially with a batik backing fabric, I tend to notice that my needles will dull a little bit faster. So I will give myself a new needle halfway through that quilt. So that might be a queen size quilt that'll take 2 or maybe even 3 needles. Again, if it's batik on the top and the bottom with applique, yeah, I'm definitely going to be using a couple needles. And when you think about it, yes, needles are expensive and we want all of our products to last as long as possible. But if you've spent hundreds of dollars and countless hours making this quilt, you don't want to sort of skimp on the very last step and give yourself a rough time quilting just because you're trying to save a 50-cent needle. So replace your needles as often as you deem necessary. Now, when it comes to needles, what kind of sizes do we have? So right now, again, we can maybe switch to this needle camera. So I have a whole selections of needles here. I couldn't find my size 14s, but we have size 12, 16, 18, 19, 20, and 21. So depending on what type of thread we're using, we are going to be changing our needles appropriately. Now, most commonly, you're going to be noticing 16s and 18s. Those are probably the two that will be the most useful needles out there. But depending on your thread and depending on your fabric combinations, you will want to make those changes. Now, with the Handy Quilter long arms, what we're looking for here is the 134 system. I know there's a lot of different numbers on these packages and they can be a little bit confusing to read, but 134 refers to the needle system Now that is the length of the needle and where the eye of the needle is in relation to the scarf, and where the shank is to the rest of the needle. So as long as it is a 134 needle system, and then we also have the 134 MR, which is a high-speed needle. So again, there is, it's still the 134 system, so both of these are going to work. Now, as far as the size goes, we have 116 and we have 110/18. Now, again, there are a lot of different measuring systems out there for threads and needles. And again, it can be a little overwhelming. So on domestic machines, you're quite used to seeing size 70, 80, 90. And then this would be the next step, going to 100 and then 110. So these are a little larger than what you would normally see on a domestic sewing machine. But with the domestic sizes, we often refer to the 16 or 18 as the numbers we're talking about. So they all do convert to each other. So don't get confused or worried if you don't have ones that don't look exactly like that. As long as it is the 134 system, it will work on our long arms. So we're going to be focusing today on all the different threads that we can use and how and why you might choose where you're going to use them. So I have a nice selection of threads here. So we're going to start with, we'll start here. So one of my favorite threads I have on the machine, this is Omni. It is a 40 weight polyester thread by Superior Threads. It is fantastic. As a beginner-friendly thread, it is strong, it is durable, it gives very little problems while quilting. And we can switch to the other little one. Very strong, durable, it works really well and quite easy to tension. So I often recommend to new quilters, start with a 40 weight polyester because it's going to be quite easy. I have a nice full selection here. This is a Glide. This is a 50 weight polyester. It's a tri-level polyester. We have, this is Magnifico. This is a 40 weight tri-level polyester, so slightly heavier than the 50 weight. Fantastico is also a 40 weight polyester. Now this one is a variegated, so it has a very slight color change. And again, on here, it might be a little difficult to see, but it's sort of a very pale pinks and grays, really beautiful in person. Omni has a variegated thread, so this is a 40 weight variegated. And again, just subtle little color changes with the greens. It is beautiful. So again, these are all very simple, easy to use threads straight out the gate. If you want to start getting into some fancier threads, we do have, if you want things to disappear, something like Bottom Line. This is a 60 weight polyester thread. It's intended to be used as a bobbin thread, but you can use this on the top. It will work. And a lot of these threads, you can mix and match what you have in your bobbin versus what you have on the top. It's okay to do that as long as you make the necessary tension adjustments. So Bobbin Line is a 60 weight, which is excellent. This is Micro Quilter. This is a 100 weight thread. So this is incredibly thin, incredibly fine. If you want your quilting to disappear into your quilt and barely see it, this is the type of thread you're going to use. I also have Invisifill here. This is a Wonderfill thread. This is also a 100 weight polyester. And again, these are incredibly fine and really fun to work with because you can really do a lot of micro quilting to tack down a background, and you're not going to see all the thread build up. You're just going to see the texture and see it all disappear. Another 100 weight thread, Monopoly. This is a nylon, it's a polyester thread, but it's a monofilament. So it's literally just one strand of polyester thread, 100 weight. This will truly disappear on every different color because it is clear. So there is a little bit of a shine to it, but it does disappear. So with all of these threads, what are we going to use in our top and what are we going to use in the bobbin? I've had great success with the monopoly. I will use the Omni 40 weight thread in my bobbin with the 100 weight on top. And I can already hear all the quilters that went, what? You used a 40 weight in your bobbin and a 100 weight on top? It works for me. I have found great success with that. I've tried using the finer thread in the bobbin with the 100 weight, and I had a lot more difficulty with it. And because I already had success with the 40 weight, I stuck with it and I didn't actually push through to get it tension perfect. But that's okay. You are allowed to use what works best for you, but just know when you're ready to push through, you can very easily do so. So there's a lot more different fun threads out there. We have one here, Charlotte's Web. It's a fusible thread. So this is something that you would use in your bobbin. And what you can do is actually stitch around, let's say a little applique. And this will be on your bobbin thread. You can lay it down onto your next piece of material, iron it in place, pull away your top thread, and this little bit of fusible will actually hold it in place. So there's a fusible thread. We have Vanish. This is a water-soluble thread. So again, if you need to baste something together and you don't want to remove the basting stitches, this will dissolve in water. So you can just wash the quilt and all of your basting will come undone. This works excellent if you're doing trapunto and you need to stitch your batting in place first, but then you want it to disappear after and not have the basting marks. Vanish works wonderful for that. We have threads like Nightlight. This is a glow-in-the-dark thread. Really fun, really adorable on any kind of kids quilts or any type of themed quilts where you want to add a little extra sparkle to it. We have glow-in-the-dark threads. We have glitter threads. So this is actually a mylar strip. So instead of this being a thread that is rounded, this is a flat little strip of mylar material. And again, these look beautiful when stitched out. We have, metallics here. This is a polyester wrapped polyester core thread. And again, beautiful shiny metallics. I have one here. This is Razzle Dazzle by Ricky Timms. Again, fantastic little thread. And again, maybe got a little too much light on here, but you can see how sparkly it is. Now, this is what is the weight? It's either a 12 weight or a 24 weight. This is quite heavy. This will not run through the top of your machine. This is only for doing bobbin work. So you'd have to wind a bobbin and use this on the underside of your quilt. And if you wanted that to be on the top of your quilt, flip your quilt upside down. And the top of the quilt will get the bobbin work, and then you will have it shining through on the other side. So again, a huge variety of threads to use. They are all going to run perfectly. And I'm going to show you here. How do you know what your threads are going to look like? We're going to make a little thread sampler. So this little thread sampler has a whole bunch of different threads and what their effects look like. And again, I made a little key onto the side of what all the threads are. And I just did them in order, going across the top row, left to right, of what each thread is. And then use some of the decorative stitches on my machine that I never get a chance to use to do that. So, making a little thread sampler. This was really fun and easy. This was a great way for me to experiment with all these different beautiful threads that I had. So I just picked one design in Pro-Stitcher and stitched it out each and every time to see what it looked like. And I just used one bobbin thread that was the same bobbin thread for all of them. So what I did first was I chose a bobbin thread, and I believe this was a glide that I'd used. So it's a 50 weight polyester, and I set my tension for my bobbin first. Then after I had my bobbin tension set, I was able to play with my top tension and go from there. So with that. Okay, so first question I see here. Some Aurifil threads, the 40 weight cotton. What type of needle should I be using for better performance? Please advise. Uh, so I used to run Aurifil all the time. I believe I was using either a 14 or a 16 for the needle. Uh, Again, because it is a 50 weight thread, we're going to go slightly on the smaller side for the needle. So again, a 14 or 16 will most likely work. Now again, how do I know that? How do I just know where to find it? So when you get your machine, we have our accessory box. Inside the accessory box, we had a bunch of little handouts, and we had, a little thread bundle. And in that thread bundle, this happens to be a Superior Threads bundle. There's a little Superior Thread catalog. In that little catalog, it will tell you what threads, what needles work best for what threads. So here I have this little catalog. And again, long arm thread reference. And it's going to go through, and this one is done by brand because it's put out by the company. But again, on our quick reference card from Handy Quilter, right for our Moxie, on one side we have all the different needle bar screen positions and what the buttons are for that. And on the back side, right here, we have our needle and thread guide. And again, needle size 12, 14, 16, 18, and 20, and what the most appropriate thread would be for that. Now, there's always a little bit of wiggle room. With almost every single reference guide, they will list two different options, sort of a smaller and larger. And that's going to come down to where you are and what is working best for that combination of your quilt. So again, depending if it's quilting cotton, if it's batiks, if it's flannels, if you're using something like a fireside or minky or one of those like a thicker polyester backing fabric, those are going to change how the thread acts with the needle. And you might need to go up or down a size with that. Now, another thing that people don't think about, if you're using polyester threads, this doesn't affect you as much. If you are using cotton thread, humidity is going to play a huge factor in how cotton thread behaves. If you've ever tried using an old thread, say you inherited thread from somebody and it came on a wooden spool and you tried to stitch with it, and you just had thread break after thread break. Cotton thread will dry out over time, and if it is more than, say, 20 years old, it's going to be incredibly dry and brittle. And again, depending how it was stored, if it was stored in direct sunlight versus being stored in a drawer where it wasn't getting that sunlight, that will protect it from the sun's harmful UV rays. So thread storage is also a big consideration when it comes to your thread. So again, I choose to have my thread on display so I can see it at a moment's notice, but I do have it positioned in a place in my studio on a wall where it does not get any direct sunlight. So that is me trying to protect it as best as I can without having it be damaged, while I can still see it and quickly grab it when I need it. So with your cotton threads, don't hold on to them forever and ever. It's sort of a use them and then enjoy them. Don't sit on them for 10, 15 years and then expect it to be as good as a brand new spool of thread. And somebody asked, is the guide on the Handy Quilter site? I believe there is the thread guide somewhere under the education resources on there. Also, I believe the Pro-Stitcher website might have that as well. There's a lot of the resources are on there. Sorry I didn't double check that one, but I know that they do exist somewhere on the website. I just don't know exactly where to get to them. And again, Eugenia says, I stopped using cotton thread a while ago. Polyester works better on my machine. Again, polyester is easier and more predictable. So you're going to have just a higher success rate straight out of the gate. But again, for years and years, I used cotton thread and it does work fine. My biggest culprit I found was speed. I had to slow down to get a good stitch with the cotton threads. So we've talked about our threads, we've talked about our needles. Now let's talk about bobbins. So some people will choose to purchase pre-wound bobbins. Other people will wind their own. Which one is better? Can't tell you. I can tell you that personally, I wind all of my own bobbins, and I have great success with winding my own bobbins. Other people have not had success with that. They've moved to a pre-wound bobbin, had great success. Congratulations, you found something that works for you. You can stick with that, and there's nothing wrong. The reason I choose to wind my own is because I prefer to match my top and bobbin threads always. I don't like using different thread colors, and I find with the pre-wound bobbins, there is a smaller color selection available. So that's why I choose to wind my own, but I definitely have pre-wounds and I do use them. I just find that my preference is winding my own. Now, with pre-wound bobbins, what is the best option? We have, I have plastic sided bobbins. These are Deco Bob. That's the name I'm looking for. And it is a hard plastic side bobbin. Now, that will work great. You know, when I'm winding my own bobbins, I have a whole bunch, and maybe we'll switch to this needle cam here. So if I'm winding my own bobbins, I have my purple handy quilter bobbins. Love them. They work great. These are the Deco Bob. And again, they are the same size. They're the M class bobbins, so they will work on our machines. But this is the plastic sided bobbin. It will run just fine. I have some Super Bobs here. Super Bobs come with the cardboard sides with the plastic core. You know, is that going to work? Absolutely, that is going to work just fine. And I thought I had one here, but I don't see it. The last one would be a Magnaglide bobbin, where they have a magnetic core in them. Now, what that magnet does is it helps to slow down the spin of our bobbin inside of our bobbin case. Is it a requirement? Absolutely not. And again, I'm just going to grab my bobbin case here. And I'm going to point out something very critical here. This is our spring. Do not remove that spring. For anyone that tells you you have to remove it to use a pre-wound bobbin, that is not correct information. The spring is there for a reason. Some people believe that because the thread will sometimes get wrapped around and caught on there, that it's an obstruction that they need to remove it to have good quality stitching. But what that spring does is it keeps the bobbin against the back of the rotary hook, and that actually helps to make sure that the thread is always lined up for the needle to go around and hook up to it. So please leave that spring in place. Now, with these cardboards, again, depending on how these have been stored, some people will say you have to remove them or you have to leave it on. You can do either. They will fit with the cardboard in place. That is the appropriate size. Some people will take off one side and leave the other side in there. Some people might have it flipped around so the cardboard is on the outside that stays, but that side is ripped off. Some people will take off both sides of the cardboard. What is the correct answer? It is what is going to work best for you. Now, a reason why you might want to remove the cardboards, this has been stored quite well. The cardboard is still in good shape. It's nice and thin. If these were stored incorrectly, or you live in an incredibly high humid place, this cardboard can absorb humidity from the air and actually swell. And if it swells, it's going to change the thickness of your bobbin, and it'll no longer turn nicely inside of our bobbin case if the cardboard is swollen. So that's why some people remove one side or take off both. Again, these are all correct answers. You can do any of them. It is okay. Let's see. Oh, and yeah, somebody has. So some more questions here. And great, I'm loving the questions. Keep them coming. Um, so a question here. Do I have extra bobbin cases for thicker threads? I do not. I will change I will change my tension on my bobbin case all the time. I am constantly tinkering and fine tuning the tension on my bobbin case. So I don't want to have this only works for this thread, and then I have a separate bobbin case for this one. I have a separate bobbin case for that. I do have a spare bobbin case in case I have an issue with this one that I wanted to make sure that I had a spare so I can continue working without interruption. I do think it's smart to always have a backup, but I don't keep them as separate tensions for only specific threads. On my embroidery machine, I do have multiple bobbin cases with different tensions for different projects, but that's what I do for my embroidery machine. So even that, I do have my own little rules that sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. For my long arms, I don't worry about that. I will just tension my bobbin case correctly each time. Now, I always make sure every time I change my bobbin that I do a little drop test to make sure that the thread didn't get wrapped around that spring, that I did make sure that I put the thread through the correct path, and that it is a tension that I deem appropriate, that something didn't change. Now, we're getting into the weeds here. Depending on what thread you are winding for your bobbins, or depending on what pre-wound you're using, you're going to have a very large difference in how much bobbin thread can actually hold onto the bobbin. So we'll take this back a step and actually talk about thread sizes. So I was listing off the thread weights. I had said 40 weight, 50 weight, 60 weight, 100 weight, and I didn't quite clarify what that means. With our threads, the lower the number, the thicker the thread, and the higher the number, the finer the thread. So the best way I like to remember this is if you are making meatballs, you have a bowl of meat and somebody says make 40 meatballs. So you make 40 meatballs and they are, whatever size they happen to be. If you took the same amount of meat and tried to make only 12 meatballs, well, the meatballs are going to be really huge. And that's the same with thread. If it's one batch of thread, of material to make thread, to make it 12 weight, it's going to be quite thick. And if you had to stretch it out to make 40, it's going to be a little bit thinner. If you had to stretch it to make 100 meatballs or 100 weight thread, you're stretching it out quite fine. And I don't mean stretched as in it's literally pulled. I mean stretching as in you're using it as sparingly as possible to make it last to make all 100. So that's how I like to think about it, is making meatballs, because I enjoy cooking and it's a fun way to think about it. The needle industry didn't get the message and things are reversed. So with needles, the smaller the needle, the smaller the number, the larger the needle, the larger the number. I don't know. Don't ask for an explanation on that one. Thread and needles go hand in hand. They've always gone together hand in hand. Why the systems use two different scales like that makes no sense to me. But I don't make the rules. Sometimes I don't even follow the rules, but I do my best. So that is thread weight. Now, talking about bobbins, if you are putting 100 weight thread into your bobbin, you're going to be able to put a lot longer, more thread, because it's finer than if you're using a thicker thread. So right here on the side of the Super Bobs, it says 240 yards per bobbin. And this is a 60 weight polyester. So if I'm winding my own with a 40 weight, I might be only getting 160 or 180 yards onto that same bobbin. And if this was a 100 weight thread, I might be getting 300 yards per bobbin. So depending on what weight you're using, you're going to get a lot more mileage out of one bobbin's worth. So one of the next questions on here, Eugenia had to get a new spring for her bobbin case. So that is something that can happen over time. That spring just loses its springiness, and it's simple to just pop them out and replace them. Depending on how old your machine is, it's not a bad idea to do that. Also, bobbin cases themselves, they can get warped. So it's not a bad idea to have a backup bobbin case just in case. But again, after a number of years, you might want to just get rid of the old one and switch to a new one because it can be warped. If you drop these, all it takes is one tiny little dent and they will never stitch the same again because the bobbin case might be hitting that little bump and not turning properly. It can actually damage the rotary hook assembly on the machine. So please be very careful not to drop these. Whenever I'm doing my drop test, I like to do it over my quilt surface. So if I accidentally dropped it, it's going to land and hit the quilt instead of dropping to the floor. I actually have a nice fluffy carpet in my studio, so that would be better than if it dropped on hardwood or concrete, but I still don't want a chance dropping it on the floor. So I always try and do it over a flat surface or a soft surface. And again, love that. So many miles. Has a spare bobbin case just for that reason, just in case. So Diana Wilson is asking about a TOA gauge. So TOA is just one brand. There are other tension gauges out there. They are a good tool to use so you can get a reading of what your tension number is. Personally, I don't like to rely on a TOA gauge. I want to use my senses to know what it feels like, what works well, and what works with this quilt. So the TOA gauge is a great sort of tool to give you a guide, and it will give you a little number on there. This is what your tension is on here. And you know if you have success running at that number, that's a good starting point. My issue with some people that use the TOA gauges is they will set it to whatever the number is, and then they refuse to use any other number. And they will change their bobbin tension so it's always running at that number. But if you aren't taking into account the materials you're stitching or what the humidity and the temperature is that might be affecting your thread, you might not have success with it. And you're going to say, well, but it's at the right number. Well, that number isn't the right number if you're not having success. So it worked yesterday, or it worked last week on that quilt, or it worked last summer when you were doing it last, but it might not work for this quilt. So if you're using the gauges, use them as a reference point, but don't live by those numbers. Live by your experience of, I'm having success quilting or I'm not having success quilting, because that's a little bit different. But again, it's a good reference to use. And exactly, Belinda has said, has a TOA gauge and can't really get the hang of it. Sometimes it's kind of jumpy. That has been my experience, is that sometimes when you're pulling the thread through it, it can kind of get clingy in spots and sort of pull a little bit out. So it isn't always the most consistent. So that's why I say not to rely on it too much, because if it's not being consistent, well, you're not going to have a good, reliable source for it. Excellent. Oh, okay. So questions from Facebook. So my faceless voice of technology is going to read out some questions from the Facebook side, because I'm only seeing the ones on YouTube here.
Okay, hello. Jeanette asks, what thread do you use in bobbin with poly on top?
So again, it depends what I want to quilt. I tend to use the Omni 40 weight polyester in the bottom when I'm using it on top, because I want to match it. You can swap that out. It could be a 60 weight polyester like bottom line with a 40 weight on top, or 100 weight on top. Again, everything can be mixed and matched. So there's no rules about it. You just have to make sure that you make the adjustments on the proper tension. Okay, that was one from there. And yeah, Sushma asks, can we use 40 weight in the bobbin? Absolutely, that's what I do. And everything that I've quilted in the last couple of weeks on here has been matching the this nice, beautiful blue 40 weight Omni in the bobbin and 40 weight on top. So we're going to show some tension here. So I have my bobbin case. I'm going to make sure I have it threaded properly. Now, when you have your bobbin in your hand, you should be able to have it lift out of your hand. And of course, because I'm doing it on camera, the thread slipped out of the thread path. But it should lift up off, and if you give it an ever so slight jiggle, it will slowly spindle down. So again, just slight little jiggle, and it's going to fall down. That is a tension that I like when I'm using Omni. Again, some people might say that this is a little high because it is staying up here. And again, I'm giving it a little jiggle, but it's sort of clinging. So I'm going to, if we switch to the needle cam, so here's my bobbin case. When I'm looking at the open side, my thread is going to be coming across the top side of my bobbin, sort of in a clockwise direction when I'm looking at the open side. I'm going to make sure it goes into that groove. And right here, I'm holding on with my thumb against the bobbin. So as I'm pulling the thread, I can make sure that it snaps and goes underneath that little spring there and into the side. And now that I'm pulling, you can see that it is turning clockwise when you're looking at the open side. So if we want to loosen our tension, because again, some people would say that this tension is too high because my bobbin case was lifting all the way up my hand, I'm going to take this first little screw here, and I am going to turn it just a little bit to loosen. Now, the important thing when you are making adjustments to your bobbin case, we are making small adjustments on our bobbin case. And again, we'll maybe go back to the big cam. So now my bobbin case is not even lifting up off my hand. The thread is, oh, it's just lifting. And then with a little jiggle, it went straight down. So my bobbin case didn't stay flat on my hand. It did turn onto its side, and then my thread starts to spool out. So I would say this is on the looser side for what I prefer, but an acceptable tension. And if I was using a very delicate thread, any of the 100 weights or the glitter mylar, the vanish or the fusible, I would want to run with a looser bobbin tension like this. It's not too loose because my bobbin case still turns up in my hand, turns onto its side, and again, every now and again, it does lift up ever so slightly off my hand. And again, if I just give it a tiny little jiggle, it starts to fall again. So we talk about like a spider. It should have a slow little crawling down its little thread. So again, I'm going to just give this tiny little turn. And maybe one more little turn. And again, this is how finicky making these adjustments can be, just tiny little increments at a time. But this is how you get perfect tension. There we go. So it's lifting up off my hand, and then a little jiggle and it goes. So again, this is what I would call perfect tension for me. And if you wanted to, you could spool up that thread back on. I'm not going to spend my time doing that. So first things first, we have set our bobbin tension. get that out of the way. This is now appropriate for all these different threads that I have going here. And again, I'm not going to worry about using the pre-wounds or anything for that. And I'm just going to pop that back in. And clear away some of our materials there. And if we go back to our needle camera, we'll do a little bit of quilting. And I'm just going to disengage my gears and just do a little free motion quilting. There we go. So again, I can't see any of my bobbin thread pulling up to the top. If I feel with my hand underneath, and again, sorry, I don't have a camera for that, I can't feel any of the top thread coming to the bottom. Again, if you just run your nail, and again, if you just sort of scratch at your threads, if you can feel your nail catching on one side or the other, you know that you have a little bit of a tension issue. So we'll switch back to the main camera. So tension is a tug of war. And quite often you'll see little graphics with people doing the tug of war because it's a great illustration of what needs to happen to get perfect tension. So perfect tension happens when your quilt sandwich, we're saying we have a top layer, bottom layer, batting in the middle. We have our thread, top thread from the top, bobbin thread coming from this way. The knot where the two threads meet and twist around each other should land right in the middle of our thread sandwich. Okay, so right into the batting. If it is pulling to the top, that means one of two things. Either our top tension is too tight or our bobbin tension is too loose because it's being pulled in that direction. And the reverse is true, that if our top thread was showing to the bottom, and if you were scratching your nail, you could feel it catching along the bottom, one of two things. Either our top tension is too loose or our bobbin tension is too tight, because they're both being pulled to the bottom side. Now, this is why we set our bobbin tension first. Once we know our bobbin tension is correct and appropriate, we can focus on our top tension, and that's just going to be the dial right here. Now, when we make adjustments to our top tension, we're making big adjustments. So if you're imagining a clock, we're going to do 15 minutes, half an hour, or 1 hour, so sort of quarter turn, half turn, full turn, big adjustments. And with the bobbin, think of minutes on the clock. When you're making those adjustments, you're only going to be turning it 1 minute on the clock. And when you're looking at that very small screw on the bobbin case, depending on your eyesight, it's not even going to look like that screw is moving. But that's why you have to do the test and see what it feels like. Because even if the screw doesn't look like it's moved, it might have moved just enough to give you that perfect tension. So this was our first example of using the 40 weight thread, bottom and top. And again, I had the appropriate needle from last week in here, and I'm going to take out this thread and we're going to try something else. Yeah, I'm just going to read these questions here. So somebody says, recommends the bobbin tension should not raise off your hand. So again, if your bobbin case does not lift off your hand, it is very much on the loose side. Again, not that it's too loose, but it's on the looser end. I prefer that my bobbin case should always lift off my hand ever so slightly. I don't want it to, when I hold it up, that it stays right at the top of my hand and doesn't move at all, because that's way too tight. It should lift off your hand ever so slightly. And again, I talked about it standing on its end. Some people will run their bobbin tension on the loose side where, as long as the bobbin case turns on its side and the thread comes out, that is acceptable. If your bobbin case won't even stand on its end when you pull the thread, I think you will be way too loose that you're going to have problems, you know, some severe problems. So I'm going to start with this Magnifico because it looks like a metallic. Now, this isn't a metallic thread. This is just a polywrap, polycore thread, and it's a 40 weight, so it's the same as what we had, but sometimes people have the illusion that it's going to be more difficult. And again, I like to give my machine some love. Instead of trying to thread it with both hands on the side like this, I feel like my hands are too large, that I have more difficulty with that. I'm tall enough that I just reach around this side and give it a little hug, give it a love, because we all love our machines, don't we? Now, I don't know if we switch to that cam, if that's going to be zoomed in enough or not, but might be a little better. When we are threading our machine, we have our first 3 grooves to go through here, or holes to go through, and we're going to go back to front, and then pull that thread around, back to front, and then pull it around, back to front. And I like to, it should go around like a little spiral, 1 around, 2 around, 3 around. Now, this is the first place where sometimes with a delicate thread, you might only put it through 2 of the holes instead of all 3. So that is something that will loosen up the tension ever so slightly, so you can make that adjustment. Then we're going to go through the next guide into our tension disc. And again, I'm holding the thread with my left hand up here. So when I'm pulling with my right hand, I can make sure to floss that thread right up into those tension discs. Now, take a lot of time to make sure that you have that thread inside between the tension discs. A culprit that I've seen before, sometimes instead of the thread going in between the 2 discs, sometimes people get it on the outside of the disc between the spring and the disc, and your machine might run with the thread like that, but it's not going to give you proper tension, and you might not understand what you missed. When you have issues like that, look at your threading. 9 times out of 10, something has been skipped or something is wrapped around twice where it's not supposed to. So make sure the thread is in between the 2 discs, and then holding one end, pull the other end nice and tight. Catch your check spring underneath the stirrup, and then have it come up to our take-up lever. Again, back to front, down through our next pigtail. And again, before we thread our needle, I am just pulling my thread through, and it feels quite tight. So I'm just going to go ahead and loosen it until it feels like it's flowing out nice and smooth. Then I'm going to flip my little thread to give myself a nice smooth thread so I can thread the needle, hopefully in one shot. And again, doing it on camera. Woo! Must be my lucky day. Always a good feeling to get that right. So once we have it threaded, same thing, I'm going to come around here. I'm going to needle down, needle up, and pull up my bobbin thread. So we have this nice gold thread on top. It might be a little hard to see against the orange, but with our blue bobbin thread, nice and dark, we're going to be able to see if we have some bad tension. So I'm just going to do a couple needle down, needle ups to lock that, and do some more free motion quilting. So these little loop-de-loops, inside the needle hole, it's looking a little dark. So that might mean that our bobbin thread is a little bit higher because it's quite dark. That would be the dark blue. it looks kind of a nice stitch on top. Feeling from the bottom, I can't feel my finger catching on anything, so it looks not too bad, but I'm going to loosen my tension just another half turn. And again, I'm feeling from the bottom side. Really no issues there. Again, the needle holes still look a little dark, but on closer inspection, I don't actually think that that is the bobbin. I think that might just be because I have a black backing fabric plus the combination of the dark bobbin thread that is just looking a little dark. Now, this is why I prefer to match my thread colors, because when you match them, you don't have to worry about that darker thread showing through as much. But if you are running separate colors, and especially if they're high contrast colors where one is quite dark and the other is quite light, or just even if they're both on the darker side, but say a dark red and a dark blue, they're going to look quite different. So if you are running those separate colors, be aware that that is something you might have to contend with. But again, straight out the gate, I had to loosen my top tension by about 3 whole turns. Now, this is still a 40 weight thread, and the Omni I was running before was a 40 weight thread. So just two different types of thread, same manufacturer, different styles, required 3 turns on my top tension. Now again, this doesn't mean you're going to have to always count 3 turns each time. You have to use your own judgment. But again, the same weight of thread will have some issues that you will have to adjust for. So again, I'm going to clip my thread. And we will pick something else. So Many Miles Studio has a great question. When you use less than the 3 holes on that first little pre-tensioner, which holes do you use? Doesn't matter. It can be the top and the bottom, it can be the top 2, or it can be the lower 2. It makes no difference which ones you're using. It's just a matter of choosing 2 of them. About the only time that I will do that is if I'm using a 100 weight thread. That's the only time I found where I've needed to skip one of those. Essentially, it's a pre-tensioner is what it is. It slows down the thread. So as it's coming up off the spool, there's a little bit of movement to it as it's unspooling and coming around. So what this first one does is it smooths down the thread and keeps it running, as it's feeding into the machine as smooth and cleanly as possible. So when it gets to the tensioner, it's not sort of being jumpy where it's moving a little too quick in and out. I will go down with 100 weight threads to only 2 of them. And additionally, what I've also done sometimes is if your thread has a tendency to jump out of your thread mast, if it hops out here, it's going to start pulling from the side of the thread and you might not see it. And all of a sudden you're going to notice your tension issues. It's like, what's happening? What's going on? You can put a little piece of batting into the groove here to prevent the thread from slipping out. And some people actually have the thread wrap through the batting. I don't do that. I leave it going through the metal, but I will just block the opening with a piece of batting so the thread is not capable of jumping out. So let's see. We're going to switch over to this Invisifil, which is a 100 weight thread. Sure. Well, I was going to say, yeah, either that or I'm wondering if I can just move. If I move all the way over, will that put me in the shot on that camera? There we go. Ask and you shall receive. And same thing, I don't know if you can zoom in on that camera. Oh, fantastic. There we go. Okay. So the first one, I've gone up over the thread mast. I'm just going to find the end of my thread here. And again, because I'm using this 100-weight thread, you're going to have a bit of a harder time seeing it. It's a soft green. But again, so we're going here back to front. Go back to front. Back to front. You can't really see any of that, but so it's gone through those 3 guides. Now, can you try and get a little lower? Sorry, the handle's in the way. There's a guide there, and can we see if we can get this next piece? Sorry, we're gonna move the camera. Okay, hopefully that's better. So can you get right in there? Okay, perfect. So that was the first 3 guides. We've gone into that guide. Now we're at the tensioner. So again, I don't know if I want to switch below. Perfect. So again, while I'm holding the thread with my left hand up top, I'm just going to make sure that it goes in between the 2 discs. And as I pull it around to this side, I'm making sure that it is nice and seated in between the 2 tension discs. I'm going to pull it around and over to catch this check spring. And what I like to do is pull that check spring to make sure that it's catching it before I come down underneath this stirrup. And then we're going to come up top here to our take-up lever. That's through. And again, right now, I am pulling to check my tension. And because we've gone down from a 40 weight down to 100 weight, right out the gate, I'm going to give my tension 2 turns. And now I can feel that it's feeding much smoother. I think I might even go another half turn there. So now I can feel that it's feeding through the machine nicely. So again, I'm going to flip my thread. And at this point, I want to change my needle as well. So I'm going to slide back here to where I was going to quilt. And because I'm using a 100-weight thread, just get my little handy quilter hex tool here so I can actually loosen this. Now, what am I going to do with this needle? This needle isn't garbage because I haven't used it that much. I put on a fresh needle before I started doing the quilting for these lives a few weeks ago. So you can keep this in a little needle book. I have a little fabric bowl that I actually tuck my needles into the end if I don't want to throw them out. For right now, I'm just going to put it into my fabric right here, just so it's out of the way. It's nowhere near where I'm going to be quilting, but I'll be able to use that later on. And now I'm going to try a 12-weight needle here. I believe a 14 would be my preferred needle size for this. But again, 12 should work. And we'll switch back to the needle cam. And again. So what I'm going to do is sort of place the needle down towards the fabric to make sure I have enough room to get it into the collar. And as I put it up, I'm going to try and make sure that I have the groove to the front. Now, there is a fancy little trick with this. Right here, I have a little cylinder-shaped magnet. What I'm going to do is pop this magnet onto my needle, and it is sitting on the 2 sides of the groove. So if you imagine the groove being my fingers, that is sitting right on those two edges, and that is pointing where the front of my needle is. And now, as I turn my needle, you can see it's giving me a very clear indicator of what direction the needle is facing. And again, on camera, because it's mounted off to the side, it might look a little funny to you, but the needle is straight on from my point of view. And then I just pop that magnet off. And again, when you put the magnet on the side of the needle, it can move around, but if you bring it around to the front of the needle, the flat end of the magnet sits right on the groove, and you'll see that it holds itself in place neatly. So there we go. I'm going to take that out. So I'm going to grab my thread. And again, let's see, 2 for 2, if I can get that needle threaded. Ooh, there we go. Almost like I've done this before. So again, I'm going to come here, needle down, needle up to pull up my bobbin thread. Couple stitches to lock it in place. And then we're going to try, again, a little bit of free motion. So you might be wondering, why do I keep doing a loop-de-loop? I have found through all of my years of experience that the fastest, easiest way to check my tension is to do these small little loops, and they're, you can see compared to my fingertip, so they're maybe a 1/2 inch wide. If your tension is wrong, if it is too tight, if it's pulling to the bobbin side, this is the fastest, easiest shape to see it. If I had just done some straight lines, I wouldn't have that little tightness. So right now, when I'm feeling to the bottom, oh, that feels pretty darn good. I think I maybe loosened a little too much. I can feel it with my nail just a hair. So I'm going to increase my top tension by about 1/4 of a turn. And then try again. Okay. Feels good on the top. Feels nice across the bottom. So there we go. So again, I happen to do about 2 or 3 turns to loosen my top tension, and we're ready to go. And that was a 100-weight thread. Now, again, if we want to see these stitched out comparatively to see the threads, like I said, make yourself this little thread sampler. And again, I tend to work with black a lot. It's always been one of my favorites. So doesn't really show the best on camera, but in person, you really truly see the differences of the threads on here. And by choosing the same design, and I did this with Pro-Stitcher, I just chose this little feathery shaped design. I can see what the exact same, without really thinking about the design, what does the thread look like? How does it look in the tight spaces? How does it look in the loose spaces? And really get to see the difference between them. I just want to make sure there's questions. Somebody asked, does Handy Quilter sell those? I don't know what you're referring to, if it was the magnet. I don't think they sell the magnet. I don't know, maybe that's something that they'll work on selling, so you can always check with them. But we were given them as just a little a helpful tip to use them. But yeah, I'm not 100% sure if they sell them. Okay, but yeah, magnets, perfect. Yeah, and the long curves, yeah, the small loops work really well for checking the tension, because again, I find the best place to check tensions is either in points or in loops, because that is where you're really going to notice it. And if you're doing the points, it's a little bit harder to feel if the thread is on one side or the other. So if you're going to do like a little zigzag to get some points, it will show you the tension being incorrect, but it's more of a visual. But if you want to be able to have the visual and to feel it, and again, for me, just grabbing my fingernail underneath, I know what's going to feel good and what looks proper just based on the feel of it. You can, by all means, I like to have a little chair beside my machine. So I'll sit in my chair and then lean on my knee so I can look at the underside of my quilt. I've seen people that have mounted mirrors underneath their long arm. So all they have to do is look at the mirror and then they can see the underside of their quilt. If you have a little handheld mirror, you could come to the edge of your quilt and use a little handheld mirror to see what the bottom looks like without having to crawl underneath, just so you don't have those surprises. So check the underside of your quilt often. And I usually do that in between. Every time if I change a bobbin, I will immediately do a little bit of quilting and check to make sure that nothing else has changed, because I've already gone in and changed my bobbin thread. I really want to make sure that I haven't accidentally caught a bobbin thread underneath the bobbin case, or picked up a little bit of lint into there. Now again, I'm sorry I'm jumping around. When you change your bobbin, that's an excellent time. Do your maintenance, do your cleaning. Give the bobbin area a brush out, or depending on your machine model, you can use compressed air or like a little blower to blow out the lint out of the bobbin area, and then a drop of oil in the rotary hook area. Now, depending on your machine, 1 drop of oil every time you change your bobbin. I have found that sometimes with fabrics that are a little bit more linty, with pre-wound bobbins that have a lot of thread, I will actually stop halfway through a bobbin, clean out the bobbin area because it's too linty, and give another drop of oil. And on my one machine, it's one of the older class machines, it needs a little less oil. And with the 40 weight thread in my bobbins, sometimes I do a drop of oil every second bobbin change, because it doesn't need it every single oil change, every single bobbin change. It's a little too much oil. So sometimes I will do that with the second one. So, Barb Smith has a question here. What top thread, needle, and bobbin thread for Minky? Again, you can use any combination you want, but the needle size is going to change depending on the top thread of what you're using. So again, pick which threads you would like to work with that are going to look the best on your quilt and with the different effect. If you want to see, I like to see my quilting. The way I always view it, and especially for my customers that pay me to quilt for them, if you are paying me to quilt your quilt, do you want to see the quilting? And where do you want to see the quilting? So on this quilt behind me, and again, isn't the best show on the camera, but what I've actually done was on the backgrounds, I used a cream thread. So it's cream thread, a 40 weight in all the backgrounds, so you can see the texture in person. And then I used the 100 weight monopoly in all of the color. So there's quilting everywhere on this quilt, but you don't notice the quilting on the colors, because for me, this quilt is about the piecing and the fabrics, not about the quilting. So again, I chose a thread that was going to disappear on the colors. These are a couple little thread samplers. And again, sorry, because I use black so much, these colors don't show. Maybe these will show a little better. I like to see my thread. So these were all done. This is 50 weight cotton thread. Oh, there we go. 50 weight cotton thread. So this shows a lot more on that fabric. And I use the matching thread, top and bottom. Now, on a quilt like this, I love this color. I think it's fantastic. It is almost Moxie XL green, a little bit brighter in the center, but you really don't see it on this side. But you see it on the back, and that's because I used a high contrast thread with a fabric that you could see it. And for me, this quilt really represented, I wanted to show off. Now, right here in the center, the theme for this quilt was sort of control to chaos. And again, on the reverse side, it was high impact in the center, fading away to the outside. So I wanted my quilting to represent that. So on this, I used Pro-Stitcher to make these scallops and to make this round ring. And if you can tell, the lines for the little scallops and the rings are quite heavier. They glow a little bit more than the quilting beside it. That's because I had Pro-Stitcher stitch out 2 or 3 times right over itself. So it did the ring, it did the ring, it did the ring. Then I went in and free motion quilted the center. And again, free motion the pebbling. And because the pebbling was quite dense, it really glows in the center. So this was all a 50 weight polyester thread. Then as I wanted more and more chaos, I did some ruler work with free motion to fill. Then I just sort of free-handed this shape and free-handed my feathers. And then again, free-handed my feathers going out. And right here, I actually changed thread colors from this sort of fluorescent green yellow to just a bright green that was just a little bit darker going out. So again, sometimes you have to choose where's this quilt going? You know, what's the purpose of the quilt? How do I want my quilting to showcase in that quilt? Then, once you've made those decisions, then look at what threads do I have in my stash? What threads does my local quilt store carry that I can easily get to? You know, and do I have enough thread that I can make do with what I have? So then you can make those decisions and then think about the outcome of your quilt as to where you're going to put it. Then once you have those, based on the thread size, choose your needle size, then bobbin tension with once you know what you want in the bobbin, then focus on your top tension. And hopefully that will give you that smooth, successful quilting story of I was able to quilt with any type of thread I wanted to because now I know how to make the changes appropriately. So somebody else has asked, do I do a test stitch to check for tension after changing the bobbin while in the middle of the quilt? Yes and no. I used to do it every single time, and I've gotten into a bit of a bad habit where I don't do it every single time now. Again, I really should, and quite often at my other machine, I have a little scrap of fabric that I just hang off to the side, and what I do is I have the little super clamps, and I will just clip it to, you know, like a bar here to the bar here. So basically just like a little scrap of fabric that goes here that I can come off to the side and quilt on that to check that tension and then move back to my project. Because I have my machine, and again, this is just my experience running my business, I only offer one type of thread for my business. So I run my whole business on Omni. It's the 40 weight polyester, top and bottom. So I don't have to fiddle with my bobbin tension all the time. I don't have to fiddle with my top tension. This is simply to streamline my business that I choose to do that. On my other machines, when I'm doing my personal projects, I use every thread that exists. And I have quite a large thread collection, multiple drawers in multiple places that hold all of my thread. But for my business, I just run the one thread. And that's why I don't always check after each bobbin change, because I know very well, you know, that it's going to be reliable. It's not going to have any issues going forward. That being said, I do that little bit of a stitch out. Maybe I'll stitch 12 or 14 inches, and then I will do a visual check. I will quickly peek underneath and actually do a visual with my eyes to make sure it looks good while I feel to make sure. So I do check it in the middle of the quilt. I just don't go ahead and do the extra stitching on the side as sort of a precursor to that. So, I want to thank you. People commenting for the beautiful quilts. Every now and again, I like to have some fun.
Cheryl asks, what mode are you quilting in for free motion?
So this machine for free motion quilting, it's set the same for free motion and for Pro-Stitcher. I have it in cruise. So I have it set to 10 stitches per inch and then a speed of 200 for the cruise. That's just what I found works really nicely on my Moxie XL. On my Fusion with Pro-Stitcher Premium, I just run in precision, just at 10 stitches per inch. And I do that for free motion and for Pro-Stitcher. This one I use cruise. Somehow I've just developed the habit that that's where they are. But again, you can use any stitching mode you choose to. You're just going to have a little bit of a difference, especially with free motion, if you're doing something like micro quilting. If you're doing lots of back and forth, small little movements, if you're in precision or in cruise, the machine's going to be kind of revving up and down. And some people will just find that noise irritating. So if they work in manual, the machine is always at one set speed and it sounds a little bit nicer. That's just one constant noise. So as you're doing those little back and forth short movements, the machine doesn't sound different. So it's just a little creature comfort. But again, I prefer on this machine cruise mode. Again, I have a little Halloween sampler, and again, there's a little bit of glitter and sparkle on this. You might have seen this when I did a blinging demo on one of the previous Facebook Lives. I don't know when that was, maybe March. So again, I've gone back and added that. And again, from the front of the quilt, you really don't see the quilting. The most that you can really see the quilting is sort of these stripes here, and then in this border where there's the orange on the white, and I actually top stitched over the binding, you can see it. But on the back of the quilt, you can actually see that there's a fair amount of quilting in there. So again, even though these were either a 40 or 50 weight threads, you really don't see the stitching that much because of the color choices. So just as important as choosing what weight of thread you're going to be using, you do have to think about what colors you're using, if they're going to blend and disappear, or if they're going to show up. Again, I got another little Lone Star quilt here, and again, there might be a little too much light here. You don't necessarily see all the little gemstones blinging. But again, oh, there they are. I'm loving the extra bling. So again, quilted fairly simply, these little radiating lines in the background, and then each of these diamonds just has this nice little swirl in it. Now this was done with a 50 weight glide. And again, just in a neutral gray color, the gray really somewhat disappears against all of these greens. So again, sometimes it is choosing what thread you want to have it disappear. And keep those questions coming. I feel like we're coming towards the end, but if you got any more. And this one. So this is an embroidery quilt. So what I've done, these snowman designs was an embroidery design that I purchased, and shout out to Megan Best at bestquilter.com. I used her tutorial for doing embroidery on the long arm. So again, if you have Pro-Stitcher Designer, you can purchase embroidery designs and convert them into a file that you can quilt out on your machine. And again, just like regular quilting, it's on both sides. but just much more detailed. And then I also did a regular Pro-Stitcher piano keyboard with the swags and some free motion quilting in here. And again, color choices for this, very simple, just a blue for the designs that I wanted to pop and a white on a white just for that texture. So it would be there, but wouldn't really be noticeable when you are looking at the whole quilt. And again, there's quite a lot of light in here, so it's probably not the best quilt to show off, but again, so sometimes just choose the thread color that's going to work best on that quilt and then worry about making your adjustments based on those decisions. So yeah, I definitely make some Lone Star quilts. They are fun. They're not as challenging as they look. You know, the Lone Stars are my favorite. That size, it makes a quilt that's about 40 by 40, or maybe it's 41 by 41. Love that little Lone Star. It comes together so quickly. To me, I can have that whole thing pieced in an afternoon, and depending on how I'm quilting it, either get it quilted the same day, or maybe if I want to go a little extra, it'll take an extra day to quilt. But those are quite often my baby quilt gifts for people, because I just know how I can whip them together and get them out. And they always turn out really fantastic. So yeah, think about long arm for the embroidery. That's a fun step, but it does require you to have Pro-Stitcher Designer to convert the design. And like I said, Megan Best has a tutorial out there for doing the conversions. It is fantastic, so highly recommend checking out her website if you're interested in the embroidery on the long arm. And again, with that, embroidery threads. Can you use the beautiful rayon embroidery threads that you have on your long arm? Yes, you can. You just might have to, again, not stitch at 100% speed, because that might give you some thread breaks or shredding issues, but make sure you change your needle to the appropriate size, set your bobbin tension first to be correct, then focus on getting your upper tension turned neatly. So I hope this answers a lot of your questions. I don't know if there's any more popping up through Facebook. I'm getting the head shake. No, there's no more questions. So I'll give you 30 more seconds to make any questions pop up. And if not, we'll be signing off. So I hope you all learned some fun techniques today about different threads and are hopefully willing to try them out and see what is going to work on your machine and have some fun and explore with it, because really, this is what quilting is meant to be. Having fun, expressing ourselves, and working on things that spark our imagination and really just make us happy. And again, if you're worried about ruining a quilt, don't load a quilt. Load some scrap materials. I'm sure you must have somewhere in all of our quilters' stash a yard or two of material that is perfectly good, but you might not be in love with anymore. Load it up, use it as a practice piece, and experiment. Try out all these different threads that you have. Try out some different techniques. Try it with Pro-Stitcher. Try it with ruler work. Try it with free motion quilting. Just get out there and try these different techniques and try the different threads and go for it. And again, even with that, try out your different feet. I had the Glide Foot 3 on my machine because that's what I prefer to use. But again, you could use the regular foot. You could use the Sure Foot, which is the taller profile, if you're going to be doing ruler work. You could use the couching feet and actually couch fibers and yarns onto this. Now, I wouldn't be using my best, most expensive, fancy thread if I was going to be couching, because the yarn is going to be the show. You're not going to see the thread. So I would go back to use a thread that I have a lot of, or something that I'm not worried about using up if you're going to be doing couching. Oh, no. Okay, so Many Miles Studios asked a question, not directly thread related, but it's a needle related question. Do I use sharp needles versus ballpoint? Excellent question. So the theory between different needle types. ballpoint needles have a slightly rounded tip, and the express purpose for them is if you are sewing with jersey or like knit materials, that instead of it puncturing the threads, the ballpoint will slip in between the uh, the threads and not pierce them. That's the theory behind ballpoint needles. Some people swear by them if they're doing t-shirt quilts because they're going to be stitching on the jerseys. I have always used sharp needles. I've done it with t-shirt quilts. I've done it with cottons, with batiks, with everything. It works for me. I have ballpoint needles. I've used ballpoint needles. I haven't found the need to require them for the quilting that I do. But again, if you are doing something that you're struggling with the sharp needles, you could give the ballpoints a try and see if they work. And a ballpoint needle is still sharp enough to actually pierce through the fabric. But if you are using it on a cotton material that is a really tight weave like batik, it's less that it's pushing through the fibers and more like it's punching through the fibers. So that's where the sharp needle will pierce and go through versus the ballpoint is going to sort of force its way through. So that's, where you would use it. And again, to each their own, but I haven't used it.
Book asks, do you oil with needle up or needle down?
I do it with needle up. I've never really, I don't think I've ever tried to do it with needle down. The rotary hook is in a different position when the needle is down. So with the needle up, the rotary hook is sort of at the lower side, and it makes almost like a little ledge at the bottom side where it is easier to see that. And I'm just wondering, I'm thinking I could demo this and show you where to properly put some oil. I'm just going to move these quilts out of the way. Okay. So we have needle camera, and what I'm going to do, so first thing, because I didn't do it, I'm going to clip my threads. So I can now take out my bobbin case, and again, so I've used the latch to remove my bobbin case. Oh, you can see Rachel there, waving in the background. Now, so on this machine, and sorry, there's no light underneath. On the Amara cloth machines, we actually have a light in the bobbin area, which makes it a lot easier to see. But this one, so right where this metal meets the black, and again, that black is our inner side of our rotary hook, and this is the outer portion. And I'm just going to unthread my needle and change to the needle down position. So see how our hook has now moved. So again, with the needle in the down position, oops, this part of the hook is sort of in the way, but we need to make sure that the oil goes in between where this black piece meets this silver piece. So again, I've always preferred to do it when the needle's in the up position because I can clearly see just the tiny little edge of that metal. And again, I'm just going to grab my oiler pen. Sorry, hard to do that one-handed. And again, I'm just going to put it right where those two pieces meet, and just one little drop right there. And again, I like to do it instead of at the very bottom, I like to do it right to the side here because I can watch the oil sort of drip down there. And in the process of trying to show that to you, I accidentally put an extra drop there. So again, that little bit I'm just going to wipe away. So what I prefer to do now is give the needle a few rotations of needle up, needle down. And that will sort of just give that oil a chance to work its way in. And especially when you oil, you really need to now quilt off to the side. Because now that there's oil down below, if we went right to the middle of our quilt and started to quilt, you're going to have that spot of oil on your quilt. So again, if I don't need, and again, because on my machine, I sometimes do my oil every second bobbin change, that's when I would just go straight into the middle of my quilt. Okay. Ooh, darn. Didn't get it. 3 for 3. Accidentally pulled the thread out. And I'm going to come back onto my little sample here. And I'm hoping that this is going to pull a little oil with it to the top just to show you what that would look like. So I don't know if you can quite see the difference on camera, but on the right where there's a little bit of oil, the thread is a bit darker because the oil is actually soaked up into that thread compared to right here where it wasn't. So definitely when you're doing your oil, stitch off into either the batting on the side of your quilt. So it doesn't have to be a separate piece of material and everything else. It can just be into your batting and backing fabric off to the side where it's not part of your quilt top, or you can have an extra scrap piece off to the side. Oh, what does the oiler pen look like? So this oiler pen, let's maybe go to this camera. Looks like this. It's a little pen, and there's the button on the back, which makes the little tip come out, and then there's a little cap for it. This is the oiler from my embroidery machine, which happened to just be right there. So I grabbed it because I wasn't planning on doing an oiling demo. So that's right off to the side. But normally I just use the standard oiler dropper with a little brass spout that comes out of it, and that's my favorite oiler. But again, sometimes you make do with what you have. So excellent. If there's no more questions, I think we'll wrap this up. So I hope this has been educational in that you will take chances and make some mistakes and try out all these different threads and try out your different needle combinations to find what works best on the quilts that you are working with. And again, depending how much you starch your fabrics, depending on how much fusible webbing there is, depending on if it's a batik or a flannel or something with a more open weave, these are all going to affect your tension. So don't be afraid to play with your tension to get it just right. I know so many people get concerned and worried about you can't adjust your tension once you have some success. Change it as much as you want, because the moment you're not afraid to change it, when you run into problems, you'll deal with it and you won't be afraid to deal with it. Whereas sometimes people get so concerned about it, they end up, getting into their own way and preventing them from having fun with new threads. So do some experimenting, try it out, see what works, find out what your favorites are, and have fun with it. So I hope you've enjoyed this. This is my final broadcast. So I'll do one last plug for myself. So my name is Nicholas Turcan. I've been a Handy Quilter national educator since 2022. I live in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, but I'm more than happy to come teach virtually anywhere in the world if you don't want to fly me out and have me in person. But I love to travel and I love to teach. So speak to your Handy Quilter retailers and ask them about education. And again, doesn't have to be me, but get out there, take classes. I'm part of a wonderful team with, I think it's over 40 different educators now. So get out there, take some classes, learn about the machines. If you don't already have one, They are amazing. And once you try one, you're going to want it in your home. I have 3 long arms in my business because I love them. I can't get enough of them. And 3 is about the limit of what I can fit. So I don't think I'll be getting any more. But they're fantastic machines. For all of the machine related information, handyquilter.com is your best resource for all the different machine comparisons, speeds, how much space they take up, what your frame options are. All of that is handyquilter.com. If you want information about Pro-Stitcher, and again, on the smaller class of machines, it's Pro-Stitcher Lite. On the larger class of machines, it's Pro-Stitcher Premium. Go to prostitcher.com. Tons of resources there. There's videos there. There are PDF downloads with lots of information. So go to those places to get that information. If you want to follow me and see what I'm up to, Mystery Stitch Designs on Instagram and Facebook. If you want to go to my website, it's mysterystitch.com. You can check out some of the information I have there. So I think that covers everything. I don't know if I'm missing anything else. I believe there's still a bonus bundle promotion happening right now. So all of that information about bundling your machines and finding a promotion is going to be either speak to your local retailer or go to handyquilter.com and find that information. So excellent. Thank you very much. And I hope to see you all again soon sometime. So thank you. Have a great one. And we'll see you next time.